Welcome. You're about to listen to a presentation by Professor Dr. Osman Balaban, a professor of urban planning at the Middle East Technical University. The presentation of Osman Balaban was part of the program of the third panel organized by CHARE as part of the panel series Turkey and Syria after the earthquakes. Dr. Balaban is a professor of urban planning at Middle East Technical University in Ankara and editor-in-chief of the university's Journal of the Faculty of Architecture. Osman Balaban holds a PhD in city planning, a master's degree in urban policy planning from the Middle East Technical University with a focus on the political and economic dynamics that shape the production of urban built environments. He worked as a postdoctoral researcher at the United Nations University Institute of Advanced Studies in Yokohama, Japan. His research and teaching covered topics such as climate change, low carbon and climate resilient urbanism, environmental politics, urban politics and local governments, and urban regeneration. In his most recent research, Dr. Balaban deals with climate change adaptation, urban resilience, post-disaster recovery planning, and social vulnerability analysis.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much, Nizam, for this kind introduction. And also, I would like to thank the co-organizers of this nice event for the event and also for inviting me to share my thoughts on the ongoing recovery attempts in Turkey with the general audience. Let me share my slides. Okay. There's the pressure. Okay. I cannot. Okay. Today I will be talking about three particular things after this conceptual introduction by Ebru Hoca. I'll be touching upon three important issues from my point of view. First of all, I will give an overview of the Turkish planning system in terms of how disaster resilience is kind of integrated into urban and regional planning in Turkey. Because after seeing the huge devastating impacts of the February earthquakes, one might think that in the Turkish planning system, disaster resilience or disaster safety is kind of ignored, but which is not the case. We have a system. And after that, I will try to point to the likely reason for the massive loss and damage occurred after Maraş earthquakes. And in the final part of my talk, I will be evaluating the ongoing recovery planning and development by national and local governments in the disaster region. And I'll try to answer the following question: are we building back better? But I'll be more on the critical side in this final part because I am not in a position to give a positive answer to this question, unfortunately. In order to integrate disaster resilience issues or concepts into spatial planning, it's a matter of kind of linking risk management and spatial planning processes. Both of them are important domains, and these two domains are kind of composed of three linear stages. In the risk management process, in the first part, in the first stage, you evaluate or assess the hazards that are threatening a particular environment, like a country, a city, or a planning area. And after the identification of the major hazards, then you evaluate the risks by means of the equation that Ebru Hoca mentioned in her presentation. Like, you put together many factors, many features of the area in question, and then you evaluate the risks that are occurring from the particular hazard. And after that, you come up with some mitigation measures in order to avoid risks possible, or in order to reduce them to a certain extent. And if risks are not fully reduced, then it might be shared equally or fairly among different sections of the society. And like this three interrelated linear stage, we also have a kind of stages in spatial planning. We first start with analytical studies. It creates the knowledge base know-how of the plan decision. And in this analytical stage, we kind of collect data and information, and we analyze them and create some important information that will take plan decisions. And in the second stage, we prepare the plan in terms of plan maps, reports, and planning codes, and plan decisions and strategies, so on and so forth. And after that, once a plan is approved, then it is put in place by the related authorities. And in the Turkish system, in the Turkish planning system, these two domains, risk management and spatial planning, are kind of linked to each other or connected to each other in two tracks. The first one is mentioned as A here. And in this first track, the hazards and risk assessment data and information is used as input in the analytical studies of the plan. And this track is mostly conducted by means of survey and opinion letters from related public bodies, public agencies. And for example, in the case of seismic hazards, geological and geotechnical surveys are prepared and approved by the ministry, and microzoning studies are prepared and approved by the ministry, and also some important official institutional data and information is provided by related ministries. And also hydrometeorology, in case of hydrometeorological hazards and floods, state hydraulic works, they provide us with some flood surveys. These surveys also contain critical information, and these sort of surveys and public opinion letters are provided to planners, and these are considered in the analytical studies of the spatial plan. And the second track of the linkage between risk management and spatial planning in Turkey is highlighted here as B, and it is the contribution of spatial planning to risk mitigation in terms of some plan decisions which will increase the resilience of the planning area or the city or the region. And these plan decisions are mostly in terms of zoning decisions based on the data and information obtained in the analytical studies. We come up with some zoning decisions. For example, in regional plans, these zoning decisions are given in terms of land suitability classification, starting from the most suitable to the least one. And in the lower scale land use plans, these zoning decisions come in the form of fault buffer zones or restricted zones, control zones, and so on and so forth. In case of hydrometeorological hazards, for example, we designate the floodplains on plan maps. And also, if there are some restricted areas in terms of flooding, they are also designated on plan maps. So this sort of a system is being in place. And this system has been strengthened after the 1999 earthquakes in Turkey. And most of the surveys and opinion letters have become compulsory, and also building codes and so on and so forth were also renewed. So therefore, we have a system, strong system to a certain extent, especially in the case of opening up vacant peripheral lands into urban development. This system can work good if it is applied as it is written. But in terms of the existing built-up areas of cities, the system had some shortcomings and it needs some further improvements. But after analyzing the system, one might think that then what's the reason of these devastating earthquake impacts in Turkey? Because the February earthquakes affected 11 cities in different ranges, but in total, 260 buildings were collapsed, and in these buildings we had almost 800,000 separate dwelling units. In a single city like Hatay, for example, 300,000 dwellings were collapsed. So the damage was high. And what was the reason for them, despite having such a kind of planning system, which is more or less linked with disaster resilience concept? I will highlight some major issues here. First of all, can you hear me? I received a warning regarding my microphone. Can you hear me?
There's a slight echo, but yeah. It's
okay. Then I'm continuing. Okay, sorry for this. And one major reason for the big damage is the urban development in inappropriate locations. For example, they are mostly observed in unplanned areas because in many Turkish cities, some parts of the cities have been developed in an unplanned way. These are former squatter lands or slum areas, and damage was high in these inappropriate locations. And also some problems originated from the old building stock, because the building stock in Turkey is also old, especially the buildings which were built before 1999 earthquakes. They were built in line with the old building codes, and they are known to be risky. And violation of planning decisions and building codes due to some corruption or bad practice issues. This is also a problem in Turkey, although we have a system, but in most implementation, the system is kind of either ignored or bypassed or violated, and this is an important problem. Inappropriate additions and modifications to buildings after they are in use, even if a building is correctly designed and constructed, but in the operation phase, we may see some inappropriate interventions, like, for example, cutting of a vertical pillar in order to open up a more space in a ground floor shop or commercial area. Sometimes we observe problems in terms of wrong building heights and building types. Planners may receive the risk data and information, but they may not be able to understand this information fully and reflect them into urban planning decisions in a good way. This is also a problem. And development amnesties. Every now and then in Turkey, since the 1960s, 1970s, governments introduced development amnesties, and with these development amnesties, some low quality buildings and developments on inappropriate locations are kind of legalized. And also in some parts of the current disaster area, after development amnesties, some additions in terms of 1 or 2 floors were made to the existing building. This also changes the whole design and structure of the building. So these are more or less the likely reasons of the failure. So after this, the question is, have we learned our lesson? And are we building back better in the disaster area? Here, I'm not in a position to give a positive response to this question, because unfortunately, according to my observations and according to the interviews that I've made with colleagues in the disaster area, we are not building any safer, or we are not building any better. Hope this may change in the near future. But what I see on the ground can be defined by using the term chaos. A kind of state of confusion. There are many things happening. There are many actions and initiatives have been taken, but they lack a kind of order and logic. There is no overarching strategy which brings all these actions and activities together. And under this chaotic policy setting, I have observed some unintended consequences, like, for example, contradictory policies, which may offset the outputs of each other. Some activities which have already been started may remain unattended. There are some competing agendas and initiatives, especially at the local government level, and also within this policy vacuum or lack of coordination, some important uncontrolled developments are taking place in the disaster area. When we bring all these together, I cannot say that we are building back better in the current disaster area. But before going into the details of that, from a planning point of view, from a planner's point of view, a long-term recovery, which may build back the disaster area better, first of all, should be based on a long-term recovery strategy, a comprehensive strategy. And after the strategy is set, the first step might be a comprehensive analysis of the post-disaster situation. Hazard and risk analysis should be thoroughly made in order to provide planners with such critical information as where to build, how to build, and where not to build. And after this comprehensive analysis stage, then spatial plans on regional and local levels should be renewed and should be prepared, but not focusing only on housing or building construction, but this spatial planning stage should target the redevelopment and revitalization of all urban and rural settlements in the region in social, economic, environmental, and cultural respects. A comprehensive planning should be in place in order to have a build back better approach in the long-term recovery. However, what we have been observing in the current disaster area in Turkey is that it's kind of arbitrary actions by central and local authorities rather than a coherent recovery strategy. And these ongoing recovery attempts seem to me that they're not parts of a general strategy or a plan, and they are kind of narrow focus. My general impression is that after the February earthquakes, the post-disaster recovery process has been kind of limited to housing construction in particular, but building construction in general. This is more or less what Ebru Hoca mentioned as the traditional resilience method, which is paying only one dimension of the general issue. And under this approach, which is not based on a coherent strategy and comprehensive planning, we are coming up with some contradictory policies. For example, when the earthquake happened, soon after the earthquakes, the government, central authorities kind of declared a relocation strategy. They mentioned that the government was going to build new and permanent residential areas or housing in some remote but safe locations on strong ground. And then a governmental decree, presidential decree were released, and the ministry was provided with extraordinary authorities in order to facilitate housing construction. And constructions already started in several locations, and there we had some important debates on this relocation strategy, because in the presidential decree, the Ministry of Environment was allowed to choose locations for permanent housing construction in agricultural lands, forests, and pasture, and so on and so forth, so ecologically sensitive areas. But after this, a few months after this, in the early July, the government declared another project, which is in Turkish terms as Yerinde Dönüşüm Projesi. If we translate in English, it's like on-site redevelopment project. It's a regeneration strategy. And this project, or this strategy, contains the provision of grants and loans, long-term loans with no interest, to disaster victims, to encourage them to build their houses in their original location. So this is the regeneration strategy, and this relocation strategy is now continuing with the regeneration strategy. And my impression from the disaster side, from cities, and with my interviews with my colleagues, people are kind of confused. Are we going to move into new but safe grounds, or are we going to reconstruct these cities in their original location? So this is a kind of confusion and contradictory. Another problem here is that after the earthquakes, government hired some commercial architecture firms, and some firms were asked to prepare urban design projects for cities like Antakya, Maraş, Malatya. And downtown city centers have been the focus of this design project, and the main target was revitalization, city center revitalization. And some of these projects have been completed as far as I know. Some of them are still ongoing, but the continuity of these projects is a question mark. There's an important uncertainty, especially after this Yerinde Dönüşüm Projesi, on-site regeneration strategy. People are kind of not sure if these design projects are going to be put in place. Again, another important problem that I see in the recovery attempts after the earthquakes is the competing initiatives. In some cities, there are similar simultaneous initiatives and efforts. They are kind of trying to do the same thing. For example, Hatay is a good example here. There are several initiatives in Hatay, in Antakya. They have been, these several initiatives have the same target, like preparing a strategy or a roadmap or a plan for recovery to the city. For example, Istanbul Metropolitan Municipality has launched a planning agency in Hatay, a similar, let's say, effort of the Istanbul Planning Agency, IPA. And this is one thing. And there is another group of voluntary architects, scholars, who have been working under the title of Ortak Akıl Antakya, Joint Wisdom Antakya. Turkey Design Foundation is also doing some similar works. And once the Metropolitan Mayor of Hatay, he mentioned that they made an agreement with the Smart City Group under UN, and they will prepare some roadmaps for reconstruction and recovery of Antakya. So there are kind of competing initiatives ongoing, and this is both on the national government and local government levels. And if synergies are not created among these initiatives, simultaneous initiatives, I'm afraid the limited resources may be wasted, especially at times when you have limited resources. You should avoid these sorts of competing initiatives in order to use resources in a more efficient and better way. And the last point that I would like to mention here is that under this policy vacuum, or under the policy environment where there is no coherent recovery strategy and where there are many uncoordinated things happening, what we see is important uncontrolled development that are happening in the disaster area. One thing here is the individual housing development in rural areas. People who lost their houses, or whose houses are kind of heavily damaged, they started to build their own houses in here and there in rural areas. If they have a land in their village or in their rural connections, they built their own houses, single-story or two-story small houses. And my colleagues in the area, they started to term these housing development as the new squatters, because they're unplanned, and they may bring some important negative consequences in future in terms of infrastructure problems, in terms of population density in rural areas, which have to be used for agriculture. And another problem here, as part of the uncontrolled development, is with regard to the permanent housing construction in the initially set locations. And some of them are over ecologically sensitive areas, for example, agricultural lands, forests, and grasslands. And they may bring loss of these ecologically sensitive areas. And some of them are quite remote to the existing cities. And if yerinde dönüşüm strategy, this regeneration strategy is realized, and if existing cities are kind of revived, then these remote housing areas may remain vacant or may remain isolated. This is also another issue here. And also there are some concerns over the safety of these newly selected permanent housing sites. Some of my colleagues are kind of concerned about the geological surveys which have already been made. And same problems also apply to temporary shelter sites. Some of the temporary shelter sites were constructed in a very rapid way, and they are, first of all, inadequate in numbers, and they are also, some of them are located in risky locations. And loss of urban identity is another adverse consequence of the uncontrolled development that is happening in the disaster area since the start of the earthquake. For example, in Hatay is also another important example here. The historical urban quarters of the cities have been kind of cleared, and remaining heritage is not handled well so far. So this is also another problem which I can categorize under this uncontrolled development. So are we building back better? I'm not very optimistic here, and I cannot give a positive response to this question. What needs to be done from now on, in my opinion, is to set a kind of overarching strategy, overarching recovery strategy, which will bring all these efforts and activities together in a more coherent way. And after that strategy is set, then maybe the regional plan and also the local level land use plan should be renewed in a more comprehensive and in a more participatory way, which is also an important criteria mentioned by Ebru. All these recovery attempts should be conducted in participatory manners. All relevant stakeholders should be brought together. Otherwise, if we cannot continue with a kind of coherent strategy and a recovery planning approach, I am afraid we may repeat our previous mistakes, and the future hazards or earthquakes may also bring some devastating impacts as the February earthquakes. These are my initial, let's say, comments and viewpoints. And if there are some questions and answers in the later parts, I might be able to give some more insights from Turkey. Thank you very much.